are the God of grace, holy with ancient of
WBISLP 1069, Winterville, Ayden, Grifton, Southside, Greenville, North Carolina. And now it's time for Family Health Matters with your host, Miss Wendy Bridgers, First Lady, RN. She is a registered nurse for over 35 years, and she has graduated from North Carolina Central University and has received her Master of Science degree in nursing from East Carolina University. She also holds a certification in the care of adult medical and surgical patients. She is a wife, mother, and born-again child of the Most High King.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Family Health Matters. I'm your host, Wendy Bridgers, and we are live in our studio on Awesome Radio 106.9 FM. We are here every Thursday from 3 to 3:30, and we want you to continue to join us. We're so glad that we have an audience that listens because we do believe the health of our family matters. So today we have with us again our special guest that always is she's so special to me. Uh, she has become a regular on the radio broadcast, and I appreciate her so much because she has so much knowledge and so much information to share, and she shares it with just such enthusiasm and such passion. And I just wish I could bottle up her energy and sell it. But I'm so glad again to have Maya Pittman with us on this afternoon. And we're going to be talking today. I've been just watching the news and listening to the media and just listening to young people in the church and just people around me and how they're so focused on what the TV says, what Facebook is saying, what TikTok is doing and all of these other things. And it just got on my mind is what kind of impact is all of this having on our mental health? And so I said, going to the specialist on this. And if it was a concern to me, I'm sure it is a concern to our audience. So Maya agreed that we will have that for our discussion today. So we're going to be talking about media impact on mental health. So Maya, welcome again to Family Health Matters. So glad you have taken out of time of your busy schedule to share with us. Before we get started, I do want to ask you, how is that little girl doing?
She is amazing. She's one, and yes, so blessed.
I'm so excited. I see some pictures of her. I'm just waiting to meet her myself personally. I know her from afar, but I'm excited to one day, hopefully soon, be able to meet her. So let's talk about the media and the impact it's having on our mental health. And maybe we could just jump in, maybe start with maybe defining what is considered media, what parts and what things play in that.
Absolutely. Well, first, you are special for bringing this to our attention because we have been, some could say overexposed these days. And so when we think about media, we're thinking about the main means of mass communication. So any tools that are used to deliver information. So that could be a platform like this, such as radio, television, and I think perhaps one of the most controversial pieces of media, but where in fact a lot of families and children especially are getting their main pieces of information is social media. Uh-huh. And so we want to look at anything from newspapers, magazine, the internet, in which we receive our information about what's going on.
And when I think about that, I think of how people are influenced. And it seems like they believe everything that they hear, or I won't say they, we, us, all of us. So why do you think, what's your thoughts on that? Why does people so inclined to believe what they hear from the media and from what they see in social media and hear?
Well, seeing is believing. And I think what's so interesting about social media, as opposed to maybe other mediums such as magazines or radio, or sometimes even television, is we can't really interact, right? All we're doing is seeing. And so sometimes there's this inherent exposure. I know that there are a lot of people who seem to think the internet is listening to us. We could be thinking about something or having a conversation about something, and then all of a sudden we're seeing ads about it. And so it fosters a belief in us with regards to the information or the medium, especially that we see it in. And when you're thinking about social media, it's something that we interact with as a form of creation as well. And so when you're talking about media and people have the ability to manipulate that and create pieces of information themselves, it even heightens the belief that one is to have in that.
Wow, that's a good point. That is a good point. Just the thought that you mentioned that people feel like people are the internet is listening. But when you talk about you hear about the Alexa and it does what you ask it to do, and you've heard stories about that, and so that can play a trick on your mental health right there.
Absolutely.
Insecurity.
And I think you're bringing up a really good point that I hope to expand on a little more as it pertains to our mental health, is that there are endless amounts of processes that are going on as it relates to social media in terms of data. And so there are jobs, there are works that are in play right now that are meant to expose us to pieces of information as much as possible. And so I think that's important for us to realize that we aren't just coincidentally thinking about things or talking about things more. There are actual programs and systems in place to give us this information at heightened levels. And I think that's even more of a reason we need to consider how much stake we're putting into that, because there is an intention and there is an absolute goal with getting us to believe and buy into what we see. And we have to be aware of that and know how to separate what maybe is a little bit more real and valid versus what has true evidence for it, and how much we can really use it to substantiate some of the things that we're trying to learn about or that we're even seeing.
Yeah, that's good, because you think about the seasons, and when you go into department stores or even just on TV in the grocery stores, the different sounds, the music that's being played, and it sounds like it's in the background, but it impacts you. And even just walking through some of the stores and you hear this music and you're just not even thinking about it, but you find yourself tapping to the beat or listening to the words. And I think too that I feel like some of it is to the point that it helps you or it makes you want to spend more. and and so that all goes into play to mental health, right?
Absolutely. I've used this phrase on this show before, which is our diet. And historically, we think about our diet as food. But
Mhm.
from a mental health perspective, I think about our diet as anything that we regularly consume. And so that goes into our bodies and it comes out through our minds, through our behaviors. And so media, and social media especially, is something that we are consuming at extremely high levels. And so it is extremely important to recognize that what goes in at some point has to come out. And so if we're taking in something that is disturbing regularly, or if we're taking in something that really has an emotional impact on us regularly, we should be in expectation that that thing has to come out in some way, shape, or form, whether it be how we're mentally thinking or whether it be how we're physically behaving.
Yeah, because that reminds me of an old saying that used to have people say, what you eat is what you are.
Yes.
You are what you eat.
Yes.
So that's the same thing with that. What you take into your body is, or listening to what you take into your brain is how you may react or respond. So tell us a little bit more about how we respond to some of the things that we take in mentally.
Yeah, and just to set the stage on that, there are lots of studies and surveys that are conducted mainly around teenagers, because that is who is really interacting
Mhm.
at high levels with social media. But in 2015, there was a survey done that said teenagers spend as much as 9 hours a day online. So whether that be on the internet or social media. So you think about that, 9 hours a day. And then when you consider going further with that, another study was conducted in 2017 that said students or teenagers who use social media for more than 2 hours a day are likely to be impacted as having poor to fair mental health. And so some of the negative effects are isolation. When you think about social media, the only thing you need to engage with that is yourself. Same with TV and other mediums of media. Depression and anxiety is a huge one. When you think about what's happening in the world today, we are seeing that. We have a front row seat to the videos. We have a front row seat to the news, and the media is the first one on the scene. And then we're being exposed to these videos over and over and over again. And so it can create these symptoms of depression and anxiety. Another huge one is PTSD. So I know, especially when you consider police brutality against African American population, there has been many circulating videos on social media, especially of those actual instances happening in real time. And they are posted by so many different news sources. So it's nothing for you to scroll down and maybe have seen the same video 6 times. Yeah. Which can create a traumatic response. And then 2 more that I really want to point out, which are very important to the adult and children, are low self-esteem. One thing that social media and the media does a fantastic job of is it creates or fosters a practice of comparison in our lives. So we're able to see what other people are doing with their lives, how they're living their lives, and then we compare that to our own lives. And I've always heard and been taught that comparison is the thief of joy. And so if you can consider spending hours and hours comparing your life to someone else's, that can create issues with self-worth and esteem. And then last but not least, I think all of this culminates down to a major mental health concern or experience rather, which is intrusive thoughts. And intrusive thoughts are any unwanted thoughts that can pop up without warning at any time. And they can often happen repetitively. And it's the same thought that pops up again and again and again. These thoughts can be disturbing. They can be very distressing. And over a long period of time, they can impact our mental health on a major level.
Wow. Now you've given us some great things to think about the negative effect of the media, of not just social media, but media, TV as well. So let's just go back with those same things that you just talked about. And just tell us a little bit about how can we recognize that in the family and how can we deal with that? And I know that's part of what we'll talk about a little bit later, but while we got these 4 things or 5 things right at the front of our thoughts, talk a little bit more about it as far as what as a family can we do to or recognize these things.
Definitely. So as a family, I think there are things that we can do proactively, and then I think there are things that we can do as a reaction to what we have observed. So I know on this show, we talk a lot about being in observation, and that is so important. And even with a 1-year-old, I know now that she's walking, when it gets quiet, something is going on. And so especially with our families, if you notice that your child or your teenager is more quiet, maybe they're isolating themselves a lot more than usual. If you look, more often than not, they may be using that thumb and they're scrolling. So a big thing that we can consider is how much are the people in your family interacting with other people? And that's a big one. So if you notice that there's a decrease in their connection with others or their connection with friends, maybe they've been wanting to be more by themselves as opposed to going out and playing, that's something to look into as a red flag for isolation or potentially depression. Another thing is when you notice that there are new news sources, it's a really good time to intervene. So what I mean by that is I can be willing to bet that when a mass shooting happens, for example, it can probably get to your child or a family member a lot sooner than you can get to them to discuss it. And so it's very important once you recognize that something's happening to go ahead and consider how you'll foster a conversation or talking to your child about it so that their only source of information is not just social media.
That's great. I love that. That's great.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things on a more reactive consideration is use other resources. So there are lots of apps right now to track how much time we spend on social media. Right now in your iPhone, you can go to settings and you can look at how many hours you were on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. And this may be something that parents want to consider monitoring on a regular basis. Another huge one is not bringing your phone or tablet to bed.
Mhm.
The end of the day is when most people scroll back and see all the news that they missed from a day, even back into the previous day. And that can be a moment right before bed in which we can psychologically make connections that we literally go to sleep on, which can be very damaging, not only to the very important act of sleep, but to just the psyche and the processing of the day. And then last but not least, considering actually removing social media apps. And so what this does is when we have our phones on us 24/7, it's so easy just as we're twiddling our thumbs to pop on an app. It's much more difficult if you actually have to go through a desktop or a computer to get that information. So monitoring social media use, talking to your children proactively about underlying issues, and then enforcing what we could call social media breaks can be a great way to help.
I like that. That's good. That's good. And I think sometimes we afraid to approach our children or our family members because we're afraid that we may not have the right answers to the questions that they may ask.
Definitely.
So what are your thoughts about that? It's better to at least bring up the conversation, because I like what you said about not allowing the social media or the media to be the only source of the information, that you need to actually bring it to the table or bring it yourself and be able to give some additional information. So how do you help parents be comfortable asking that hard question?
That's a great question. And I think it starts with the expectation that we have of ourselves. One of the things that as therapists and good clinicians always share with their clients is that I am not the expert in your life, and I never
Mhm.
will be. And so for parents, I think we can take the pressure off of thinking that we need to be the expert in what we talk to our children about, and realize that the value is more so on the dialogue about emotional experiences. And so it can go a long way just to open a conversation with how certain pieces of news or pieces of information make us feel. Another great thing to do is, I always mention, we talk about the dinner table a lot on this show, but it's a great idea.
Family time. That's family
Family
time.
time. So it's a great idea to actually model the expression of emotions. What would it mean for a young child to hear their mother or their father say that they are feeling fear? Or what would
Mm.
it mean for them to hear their mother or their father say it makes them nervous to go to the grocery store? That modeling can actually go a long way. And we should really challenge the assumption that if I bring it up to my child, that it's going to give them even more to think about and more ideas. Studies show that processing out loud with our children about these emotional experiences actually go much further, and are much more positive than not talking about them at all.
Yeah. So that's good. That's good enlightening, because sometimes we feel that we should always have the answers. And especially sometimes, and this is women seem to think that we should always be able to fix things. And it's not necessarily that we need to fix things or have the answer. Just listening, as you said, just listening. And you talked about, we always on the show go back to the table. And it's not necessarily the table, but I think that the going back to the family conversation, be it at the table or be it in front of on the sofa, on the deck, outdoors, it's still that idea of coming together and having those hard conversations or those easy conversations, just a little bit of how your day went. Or if you see something on TV, how does that make you feel? Because I like the way you always say, well, tell me, how does that make you feel? And that allows them the opportunity to actually talk and to know that you really care.
Absolutely. One of the biggest things that media can do for us is it interrupts human connection. And human connection is so important on so many levels because it gives us an opportunity to not only humanize our experiences, but develop the very real and valuable tool of empathy. So understanding what others' experiences are. And one of the downsides, more often than not, to social media and being exposed to so many different videos and disturbing messages and pieces of news, is that it puts us in a position where it begins to desensitize us. And we can lose our ability to connect with others in a meaningful way. And so, as families, we want to kind of offset that by creating more opportunities for connection. making that a pleasant experience, in some respects, making that a source of information. Hey, did you know, or did you hear about this happening today? So that people and children can understand, hey, my only source of information does not have to be this website or this Instagram account or Facebook page, but I can actually ask my parents if they've heard about this before, or I can ask my aunt if she knows what just happened, you know, in the NFL or whatever have you. So that human connection is something that gets interrupted with media use that we need to be aware of.
That's great. That's great because you know, I think sometimes we don't realize the wealth of knowledge that we have in our own families or our extended families. We think that it has to come from somebody who may have a PhD or somebody who may, you feel in your mind, is so educated, but your grandma who may or may not have a PhD. I'm not saying that they are, but wisdom. And the only way you can connect with that is that you go back to what you said, human connection.
Yes.
And you can't rely on the media piece. That is great. That is great. So talk a little bit about we talked a little bit about boundaries, but how can me as a parent or our viewers as a parent set some boundaries? I know we talked about, you know, monitoring the amount of time that your child is on the computer or access to social media. How can you communicate that as a family?
Yes. So I think education is a key component here. So I know, I'll say back in my day, a huge,
Back in your day, so what do I say about back in my day?
you know, and it's so interesting how time changes so quickly because, you know, up until I did not gain access to social media until I went to college. And so a major way of learning about how to use information came from going directly to the library. And it
Mhm.
was there that I realized, oh, there's so many different ways for me to get access to information. There's books, there's magazines. I don't just have to rely on social media. And I think that's something that's missing today. And so for free, we can take our children to the library and expose them to different types of media. One of the key pieces in interrupting this and being in a position where we can create boundaries is to say, hey, how about we put a cap on the idea that the only place I can go is social media, and expand our boundaries by knowing, hey, I can read this book to see what they have to say about this, or I can go to this magazine and see what they have to say about this. And what that does is it kind of breaks the boundaries open and allows our families to not only connect by going to the local library, but to recognize that there are more than a few ways for me to get my information, and I have to learn about how to utilize that. A lot of times libraries offer classes on internet usage or social media usage. This is an opportunity for children to understand and for families to understand that, hey, there's editing that goes into a lot of these videos. What you see is just not flat out the truth. And that can make a world of difference for how someone may interact with the information they receive. They can be a little bit more skeptical and learn that they have to consider that when taking in information. And so in terms of keeping things in from a boundary standpoint, I would encourage you to consider, how can I actually expand the
Mm.
worldview of information so that my child knows that they have to do their research and not just take everything at face value.
That's great. That's great. I can hear in my mind somebody saying, "A book? What's the book? A hardback book?" And now May would know an ebook, a hardback book, a library. So I think that that's part of our responsibility as parents, as aunts, as leaders, is to share that information with our children and whoever we come in contact with. Is that, as you said, that library or a book has a wealth of knowledge in it, and but you have to go in and find it. And so, and I love the idea about the research and researching why somebody said something, because as you said, you can't take everything at face value.
Absolutely. And you know, another thing that I would encourage are other forms of opportunities to process. So what I mean by that is get in contact with your offline interests. That could be exercise, that could be a walk around the block, even though it's been super hot lately. But engaging in physical activity is a really good way for us to actually process what we've been taking in mentally. And these are very important components of our mental health: exercise, physical well-being. And so that can go a long way in terms of interrupting sort of the ruminating thoughts about what information was potentially taken in that day. It can have a very great unconscious effect on children and especially adults, just to kind of have an opportunity to release and take care of self in that way.
That's great. That's great. As you were talking, I was thinking about when you said, taking a walk, and I see so many people walking and they have their phone in their hand with their earbud in, and I'm just like, are you looking at the greenery? Are you looking at the scenery? Are you looking at the people that's around you? Are you listening to what's what is that saying? People say you have to unplug.
Yes.
So you have to unplug. Maybe take a walk without any type of media device and just see what you see.
Definitely. It's funny. My friends and I, we have a creative game that we play where when we go out to dinner, everyone's phone goes in the table, and if whoever touches it first pays for the appetizer. And so,
Oh, that is good. That is good. That is
it's a
good.
really, great way to encourage families to get creative. Maybe you can design and decorate a shoebox, and when children come in, they say, hey, you got to put your phone in the box for the next 2 hours. This is a good way to work together as families. I see things like this and as opportunities for connection and opportunities for families to come together and find solutions to some of the obstacles that we're facing.
That is great. I was reading, and as I was thinking about the show, I was reading, and you tell me if you've heard this. I was reading about creative family media plan. Have you heard anything about that? About just planning what it's going to look like? How often you would? Can you talk a little bit about that? Have you seen that in your reading or anything?
I haven't heard of it called that specifically, but I have heard of families having rules and boundaries around social media. And so an example of that is when families use chore charts. And so they may actually have like a social media chart, so to speak, in which it has like social media hours and then what families may call quiet hours, which means, hey, these are moments where you have to take up rest. You may not need to take a nap. You may not need to go to sleep, but you do rest. And that rest contains quiet hours, no phone, no social media. And so I imagine it would be something similar to that.
Mm-hmm. It was very much similar to that, and the big piece that I gleaned from it was the fact that it was a family effort, and
Yes.
it was a family plan that the children had some input on it. The parents gave some guidelines, but the children were able to put their input in, and they were respected, and it was a family plan, and that was what stood out to me. Same thing with the chores, the charts, was actually having that connection, and that goes back to bringing it to the table. Staying connected and being able to share that information. And I was also reading a little bit about shutting down social media before you get ready to go to bed. To
Yes.
sort of just unplug, sort of help you to just sort of relax your mind, that
Absolutely.
it will help you rest. And I think it was said like 30 minutes to an hour before you anticipate going to sleep. You need to start winding down, dimming the lights.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about screen time is what we call it, that blue
Yeah, that's
screen.
the word. I remember that screen time. Yeah.
Yes, that blue screen, literally what they call it, can have an impact on our ability to have restorative rest. And so we may not notice it, but we can surely feel it. If we use the internet or the TV to go to sleep at night, we may not have as restful, restorative sleep as we need, which is critical to mental health.
Yes, that is correct, because I have found even with myself sometimes the last things that I hear on the TV or on the news is some things that I don't know if I necessarily dream about, but those things are part of my thought before I go to sleep, and just during the night seems like I wrestle with that. So I tried to make it my plan to do some Bible readings, read some, to sort of helpfully sort of close my mind into something a little bit more spiritual.
Yes, definitely. I love that.
Well, Maya, thank you so much for being here with us today. The time just runs so fast. I enjoy all that. You have been so helpful sharing your information, and you're part of us as a regular member of Family Health Matters. So we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say to our Facebook family, thank you for watching us, and on the radio, thank you for being here with us. Look forward to seeing you on next Thursday on Family Health Matters. Awesome Radio 106.9 FM. I'm your host, Wendy Bridgers. Join us from 3 to 3:30 on Family Health Matters. Thank you to our Facebook fans.
Christian inspiration for the family.
Thank you, Maya, again for being here.
Practical Christian